Absolute AppSec. I'm Ken Johnson at CK Tricky on Twitter, joined by my co-hosts Seth Law at Seth Law on Twitter. Seth, say hi.
Hey, everybody. Welcome back. I know we're a couple days over this week, just schedules adjusting and everything like that. So we're coming to you on a Thursday as opposed to a Tuesday. But those of you that listen after the fact don't care anyways, so it's fine. Yeah, Ken got the intro right, so I'm excited. We're excited to have Ron on today to talk. It's been a long time coming. He was just thankful that I was still alive after I had to cancel the last time we had him scheduled. So I'm grateful I'm alive too. That's all. So as far as other stuff that's going on, other announcements, for those of you that did not hear, we will be at Black Hat teaching our secure code review course, a special edition. I think it's called Next Level Bug Hunting Code Edition, right? Because it has to be cool for the Black Hat crowd. So the slides will all be in black because, you know, at the very least, right, Ken? That's all we do is change things up.
Yep, that's all we do.
That's all we do. Yeah, there'll be some extra Black Hat style things within that course. Ken and I have been kind of bouncing some things back and forth that we want to target for that course. So if you'll be at Black Hat, please consider us. If you haven't taken the secure code review course or you want to know more about it, please, jump on in. We'd love to talk. Other than that, I will be at B-Side San Francisco in a couple of weeks doing a secure code review workshop. That one will be more hands-on, more of a shortened version of what we do, and more focused on actually finding bugs in code. I think outside of that, though, Ken, what's your schedule look like? I know we'll get into it here in a little bit, but what's your schedule look like?
I was actually mentioning it to Ron, which we'll get into this because Ron's one of the co-founders of Loco Moco. But I think I might actually end up going to Loco Moco this year. I was on the fence just because of schedule, and last year was a heavy travel. But yeah, I think I'm going to go do Loco Moco, so it should be fun.
Now what is Loco Moco?
Yeah, if you haven't heard of it, it's a security conference in Hawaii. Yeah, I think this has been the longest running troll on you, Seth, that we've done. So
I know. Yeah, now I just troll myself on it because I really want to go, and I don't know if schedules are going to align this year given the week that it is. So we'll see. It's still up in the air for me as well. But.
Yes. Yeah. No. I mean, well, hey, if you can make it, it'd be really fun. Get the
family out.
Get some good education. Get the family out. It's a good time. It's really good time. So
cool.
So I guess we should. Is there any news that we need to go over? Or are we good there?
There was one thing. Okay, so I know we love Portswigger, right, on the podcast. We always talk about James Kettle. We always talk about the research that they're doing. The top 10 from last year they're actually digging into. I know it's more focused on kind of the bug hunting or the bug bounty portion of application security, but it's always super interesting to look at from our perspective. There was a new blog post today from Portswigger, not from James Kettle. This one's actually from Gareth Hayes on DOM clobbering. And we'll post the link up there. I just started to get into it. I wanted to bring it up because I don't have a good understanding of necessarily what the attack is. I know it's been around for a couple of years, but I think it's one that we should probably highlight, right? It's one of those self-fulfilling prophecies again, right? Hey, we teach everybody about XSS and everybody, guess what? They find XSS, but it something else that's popping up is that DOM clobbering attack. And so I wanted to bring it up. Ken, have you had familiarity with it? Have you dug into it at all? Or Ron as well, right? I know we haven't introduced you, but you can say something at any point, right? Are you familiar with it, Ken, at all? DOM clobbering?
No, when you first said it, I'm going to be completely honest. I thought you said dog clobbering. I was like, why are you clobbering dogs, you monster?
So I need to enunciate better. I will work on that, Ken.
No, I think you still have a little bit of that sinus stuff going on from your original coronavirus.
Oh, sure. So now you're saying that I'm nasally. Got it. Thanks.
Is that also go by the moniker of Mutation Based XSS, the DOM clobbering, or is that a separate, distinct issue? It's hard with some of these terms, right?
Yeah.
There was. Did you see the cross-site scripting in Google's homepage this year, or I guess it was last year now? But they had that mutation-based vulnerability.
Yeah, I think
trying to recall.
I think it's similar to that, right? Because it seems to be, hey, we can overwrite specific elements of the DOM, with an XSS style attack, right? So it's not necessarily I'm trying to do JavaScript. It's just I'm manipulating, elements, like I'm inside of a form element and I may be manipulating, the input ID or something else to expose data, right?
It's a content injection attack, not necessarily a script injection.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So it's more content injection, at least from what I understand of it.
I feel like I saw one presentation on it, but yeah, I don't know what the defense is. I'm not up on that.
Yeah, I think it's the same. You're still you're still trying to protect the data, the input as it's coming in. You're validating input. You're encoding output, because it is targeting the DOM, right? It's targeting the browser specifically, so it is a client side attack. It's not a server side attack.
It's still pretty straightforward in the example they show, though, which is just basically like creating an element, meaning to create an element, and then taking some URL and then appending creating basically this script object, right? So you got your script object, then you append some details like a URL, and then you use append child to that. But then you would, I guess, presumably have the href under control. And so that would be the part that then is appended. And so malicious JavaScript is placed within it, it looks like. So it's still pretty much XSS, right? Content injection, whatever you want to call it. It's not this example here. I'm sure there's cooler ones, but this one's pretty straightforward, I feel like. And I see that they have got form. Yeah, it still doesn't seem, I don't know. It's cool, but maybe I'm just reading the wrong article too.
Are you reading the blog post from today?
I don't think I am.
Okay.
That's the problem.
Yeah, it seems like he's got some new, he's definitely pulling in script attacks, right? But I think it's almost like he's attaching them based on the DOM as opposed to just writing strict HTML, right? So, yeah, it's one that I think we need to probably talk about a little bit. It looks like they've got a couple of interactive DOM labs in Web Security Academy that they've built out as well. So it might be an interesting one to dig into some more. Yeah. Their
blog is giving my OCD a run for its money. Oh my God. It's just all these different icons and different sizes and shapes everywhere. It's just driving me nuts. I don't think I can look at this anymore. Anyways. All right. Yeah, but it's content injection is content injection, right? It sounds like you're just, in this case, you're just overwriting some elements on the page.
Yeah. So. Yeah. Lewis on the YouTube chat was saying it's using HTML to create JavaScript elements, right? So it is HTML injection. So
it's a very succinct way to put it.
Yep. Thanks, Lewis. That helps clear it up actually for us quite a bit. So considering I had just dove into the blog post, that helps. So
I almost want to share my screen just so people can see what I'm. Yeah, you know what? Oh, I don't know. These are with two monitors. No. Let me see if I can application window just so people can see this. Can you see that? That would drive. Okay. Well, I don't know how screen sharing works then. Whatever.
Super professional.
Yeah.
So, Ron, welcome to the podcast.
Yeah. So far we've talked about requests. What are we talking about? We're talking about clobbering. That's the first thing we discussed. What about the new version of Node that just came out with the security update? Did you guys clock that one? You see that go by?
I saw it.
Did not.
I saw it come through, but yeah, let's talk about it a little bit. What was what were the highlights on that one that you saw?
I think it's part of a larger theme, which is, historically you would use a web server that was built by someone else that maybe had a lot of eyeballs on it. These days, people have been building their own web servers using Node.js. So typically you have like a Node.js server that you authored. And if you have that situation, the underlying library, it looks like has some type of request smuggling type attack that's now possible based on the way that it parses the headers in the request. So you can smuggle an additional request if you've authored your own web server. So if you don't have Nginx or something else in front of your Node servers, you might be vulnerable to this if you haven't upgraded.
Interesting. Yeah, that's that security release they just were talking about, right?
Yeah, it just came out. I think it was delayed. It was supposed to be out, I think, earlier this week, and then there was some chatter about it, and then I think it's out now.
Okay.
It seems significant. So upgrading your Node Engine version to a version that has a protection is the goal.
Yeah. Yep. Yeah. It says it's talking about the stricter HTTP parsing in there in this release, right?
Yeah, it's like 3 different security bugs. I think the request smuggling looked like the most significant one to me.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, and there's been a lot of focus on that, right? You look at, again, the stuff that's come out, that James Kettle has been talking about with request smuggling, and if there's an issue where it's not handling that quite right within the node, within Node itself, then that's an issue. So I'm trying to find the actual ones that the CVEs that are there, but I'm not seeing it right now. So
they do link to in the link I just posted, it shows links to the commit that fix the issues like trailing headers, and we're able to like append additional content. So that's pretty interesting.
Oh, yeah. Yep.
It's got some cool unit tests in there. I love seeing when people write unit tests for I love reading security centric unit tests. Those are always fun.
Yeah. I don't know. I've been involved with it. I mean, I know, Ken, you deal with all this all the time, but been, helping somebody out with, the running their bug bounty submissions, right. Or, their intake. And that's been the biggest problem that this specific organization has had, is they fix it and then it doesn't get into the release train, right? And they reintroduce it because they weren't testing for it, right? So
this is one issue I always think about when people fork libraries, and you're like, that's great and all, you want to make your little changes to the fork, but maybe consider a pull request to the main fork or to the main the main repo, because you're always going to be behind and you're not going to get those security fixes in there, and ultimately it's going to end up being kind of unmaintained. But what I should do, can I do a proper intro for Ron Perris, by the way?
Yeah, let's do that. We're only 15 minutes in. It's fine.
Right.
That's your style. I know this is how it works.
There's no shame in that, I guess. Should be a little bit, but there isn't. Anyway, so you're a security engineer. So Ron is a security engineer at MPM, which is really awesome because we do have questions. We're going to get into that. That's really something we want to focus on as you're working at NPM. But you've worked, it looks like, all over the place: Synopsys, Cyber Toolbelt, NT Objectives. I remember using NT Objectives. Let's see, the list goes on, but
yeah, it's okay. Yeah, I think the most important part is the stuff I'm doing at NPM now, right? Probably the most impactful stuff I've done in my career is what's happening now.
Well, I would also throw in there that you've co-founded both the OWASP AppSec Cali conference that we love to go to, that I didn't go to, Seth, sorry, this year, but I usually try to make it out there. And then Loco Moco Sec, which is the security conference in Hawaii. Seth, I want to make sure that you know. Yeah, it's in Hawaii. So
those are great conferences, and I promote them and think people should go to them. I'm doing a training this year at Loco Moco Sec, so folks who want to check that out, you can see what I'm doing there. But I'm kind of the Dave Mustaine, if it makes any sense, of computer security conferences. Do you guys remember Dave?
No.
So for Metallica fans out there, when they formed Metallica, there was a guy named Dave Mustaine, and he was just there for the first album and a half, and then he was off. And he started a band called Megadeth. But yeah, that's kind of been my deal. As I get involved in a con like AppSec California, I'm there the first couple of years, and I support and I appreciate it, but I'm not even currently an organizer at Loco Moco Sec. I was just involved those formative couple of years. Neil's really the man behind that conference, and it's his vision. And I got involved with Neil because I was running the Orange County OWASP chapter at one point.
Okay.
Neil was a really active member of that, and he had a vision to kind of take things in a different direction. As far as we had Builder, Breaker, Defender, that was the mandate with OWASP, and Neil was like, let's just like Builder. And I was like, yeah, Builder's cool. So I think AppSec California was his vision to like move things in that direction, and then he had the vision to move it even further in that direction with Manico and start the Loco Moco Sec conference. Yeah. I just sort of tagged along.
I think I've said this before, but like the Loco Moco Sec conference last year, I ended up with a notebook and a pen, just writing down a bunch of stuff, which I haven't done. And also using like tweets as sort of a way to capture the most important bits to bring back to the podcast and work. But like, I don't get that much anymore. I don't go to conferences and sit there and talks and take notes. That's the one place though. That's the one conference that I absolutely do, because, you know, there's folks from Google, Dropbox, just a bunch of different companies that are doing. And also one thing that was too cool too was like, I think that was maybe the first year where they had the Fun Capture folks on there. They might have had them the second year too, but that was really cool just to see like what their process is and how that all works. So in terms of like a useful conference, especially if you're on a blue team or you're building products, yeah, I like highly recommend it, because it's note-taking worthy. It's the best way to put it.
I learn multiple things every year for sure.
Yeah. Well, and I don't know, like that's one of the reasons that actually, like, you talk about helping build out AppSec Cali as well, Ron, but that's one of the things that I found there as well, is that the talks aren't like, when I go to a security conference, most of the AppSec talks are very basic, right? It's like, oh, you know, AppSec 101, how do we break things? How do we, you know, XSS, or maybe, you know, there might be some bug bounty stuff that's in there that's kind of interesting. But from a defender perspective, or somebody that's working in the industry, they don't get super technical, right? I know they're trying to improve that, and, you know, things like the Blue Team Village and the AppSec Village at DEF CON, you know, some of that content they're trying to push a little bit further. But given the nature of the security people that go to those conferences, it's a lot harder to have those conversations, right? It just is. As opposed to something like AppSec Cali, where it's mostly OWASP members, it's mostly people that are working in the industry in a ProdSec or AppSec capacity. We see, like, at least me personally, I see talks that are more relevant to what I'm doing on a day-to-day basis, and not just good reminders, but realistically, hey, we're pushing the edge. Like, you know, I keep thinking back to Clint's talk and other things like that. But
it's interesting, you know, like one thing I forget who I'm quoting here, but, you know, the future is here, but it's not evenly distributed. I always like to think about that. So depending on where you are and what organization you're in, you're going to have different relevant needs. But I think that, like Loco Moco Sec is definitely a version of a future, right, of where things might be going for security folks. And, you know, DEF CON's obviously a large community. I remember I did my first pen test back in like 2001. And I remember somebody asked me to do it because we were working on a platform that was considered relatively securely coded. And I couldn't see the connection. Like I said, so we have a securely coded application that, you know, we maintain, and you want us to do what? Like in the middle of the night, go and try to break into your network, and like with no knowledge of your code base? Are you sure we're the right people? And they said, well, it pays $10,000 a day. And I said, we're the right people for sure. But, you know, then I went on to work with some friends to build some security tools to automate a lot of what vulnerability assessment and pen testing is. And I spent, you know, 10 years on that. I thought that would be an exercise in awareness, and that everybody would get the message, right? Like, there's vulns and we got to fix them and we got the code fixed. But, you know, I feel like the number of pen testers in the market now is probably at its all-time high. Yeah. So we're not moving away from previous history. Those histories are going to exist as current for a while, and then there's going to be a group of us doing other things, like worrying about product security, and eventually others will join us worrying about that aspect. So.
Yeah, no, and that makes sense, right? Yeah, as the security industry grows up, I mean, you think about it now compared to 10, 15 years ago, and, you know, it's starting to silo. There's different aspects, right? Back then, you were just a security person, right? There wasn't, you know, you were expected to, you know, implement firewall rules and then actually go pen test after, you know what I mean? There wasn't quite this clear separation between engineers and analysts and pen testers and other things. That's happened over the last couple of years. But yeah, so I think it makes sense that we're gonna keep splintering until we've reached, I don't know, some sort of panacea of, or saturation of the security market. But I still feel like we're pretty immature, right?
What I remember is the cost to do a change and the amount of risk associated with change was very high back then. And so you needed to have like an exploitable vulnerability or weakness that you could prove, and you really needed to be able to prove that out so that you could drive that change. And now the cost of change is very low. But organizations that are agile, at least, can easily change their software. So now it's more like, well, it's not so much about creating the fear and the awareness through pen testing. It's more about just letting the developers know what the secure coding patterns are, and then helping them to make the changes and get the new versions of the apps out.
Yeah, that makes
kind of
sense.
Boring.
No, I mean it is, but it's not, right? Like I feel like we find more interesting vulns that way, right? Like the stuff that we're able to tease out, like in the code review process, as opposed to just banging on an app and trying every possible input that's in there. They become a lot more interesting. Or the ones that come out of like the bug bounty programs, right? The stuff that actually pays out well is usually a super novel attack rather than just, hey, I found XSS in this. But then I also have that whole cynical part of me as well. And apparently I'm very like opinionated today, so we'll just go with it. But there's the cynical part of me as well, that I walk into so many organizations that are still stuck in that mindset from 15 years ago, right? Yeah. It's great to go to Loco Moco and AppSec Cali, and we're talking to people from GitHub and Microsoft and Netflix and Segment and all those guys, but that is not the majority of the clients that I deal with. The majority I'm dealing with are like, hey, we do agile. And I'm like, no, you really don't, right? Like just because you call it agile doesn't mean that you're releasing daily.
With their 3-month sprints, right? We're agile.
Yeah, exactly. No, we have 2-week sprints. I'm like, yeah, but you're only releasing every 3 months. This is not agile. Okay.
Yeah, so the cost of change is high. Yeah. They're not living in the same future.
No, they're not. I mean, they're getting pulled into it for sure. But then even some of like the smaller, like small startups and things like that aren't Silicon Valley based, I see the same thing happening, right? They're using they're outsourcing half of their development to some firm that, outsources half of that to India. And the way that it works is they're all structured around that waterfall methodology. And so it's very difficult to actually institute those changes. So like the pen test, when we come in and do that on a yearly basis, is still that, oh crap, what are they going to find? This is what we're working on for the next 3 to 6 months, because they're still stuck in that mindset. And I don't know how to change that, right? As an outsider, it's very difficult. Right? Like
I'll tell you a weird place that I've been living where I'm experiencing these two cultures is I volunteer as part of the Node.js Foundation security work group. Are you guys familiar with this project?
Okay.
Only because you told me about it.
I got involved in a kind of an interesting way. Just a brief background. Jim Manico tapped me a couple of years ago to write a course for Synopsys on secure React code development and how to write secure code using the Express framework. And as I was writing these 2 courses for Synopsys, I was just reviewing third-party components and noticing small vulnerabilities. And I was looking for a place to report them. And I found the Node Security Work Group is a group of triagers, Liren Tall and others, who basically will take these reports and then they'll work with the maintainer to get the fix out. And they'll do the whole embargo period and responsible disclosure and all these things. So if you find a vulnerability in a third-party component, one of the places you could send the report is the Node.js Foundation Security Work Group. And I was reporting vulnerabilities, and it seemed like they had a backlog and they needed some help. So I joined them, and I've been sitting in there and looking at that inbox and doing some triage of vulnerabilities from that ecosystem. And it's a very interesting situation because you have these open source developers who are strictly devs in a lot of cases. And then you have these folks that are more like it's on the HackerOne platform. And so the HackerOne platform, that's mostly offensive security folks. And so they're reporting it kind of, hey, there's an issue. But the interesting thing is they're reporting it in a library, which they don't usually do. Like usually they're attacking a live application. And then they're telling the developer like, hey, if I call your library in this way, it's vulnerable. And the developer's going, well, you're holding it wrong, right? Like Steve Jobs with the iPhone. Yeah. And then like I'm kind of in the middle of this. Like I'm for sure gonna get some of these wrong, right? Where I'm either siding with the developer and saying, yeah, you shouldn't call it like that. If you're calling, that SQL raw method, it's going to be injectable. Or I'm siding with the attacker and saying, yeah, it's not obvious that you took their string and used it in a sensitive parser context that caused arbitrary code execution. So it's like this interesting world to get to kind of talk to these two groups.
I actually had that exact situation with an npm package where it was basically trying to be flexible so that you could have different OAuth provider servers listed. And like we can talk about the merits of that nonsense at a different time. But because of that, if like you're taking that as a parameter from the user and the user just like didn't provide it to you or just didn't provide it to you and it was an empty string, it would actually throw an error, but the error would have the OAuth client ID and secret and some other relevant details. So it's like, in that point, is it that I think personally, obviously the library shouldn't be doing that. Clearly, like there's no reason to leak those secrets there. And echo them back to the user, but at the same time, like that's not the most secure usage. So it is like one of those weird middle ground territories where you're like, who's got the real issue here. So I don't know.
And there's a lot of that. Like I just had one come out publicly where I figured it out. So these JavaScript URLs, right, that we all have to worry about every time we use, an href, we have to make sure it's not a JavaScript URL. Well, in Node, there's a native parser. In the browser, there's a native parser for URLs. But there's also a module on NPM called URL parse that has like 5 million weekly downloads that people happen to use also. And I just noticed that you put a space at the beginning of a string that you give it, it will tell you that it's like it's a JavaScript URL with a space at the beginning. It'll tell you that it's an HTTP or HTTPS URL in some cases. And I was like, well, this seems bad. And then I worked with the maintainer kind of to get that fixed. But it's like, is that a risk? I mean, you should trim your own URLs, right?
Yeah.
But the standard library does the trimming for you. So it's like, I have prior art that shows that you shouldn't have to. And then it's like, well, is it a vulnerability in URL parse? I mean, he's not saying you should use this thing to assert the protocol of a URL. Right. It knows how to parse things, but it's like, well, it has a high impact if people are using it for that purpose. So it doesn't really fit with the current risk scoring metrics we use, like CVSS and other things. So I feel like this is a new territory, this whole shared library vulnerability assessment space.
It is pretty interesting. And libraries do comprise most of the application these days, right?
Right.
And that was like Adam Baldwin's like main point on his talk at Loco Moco sec. So
yeah, and I mean, you think about most of like the high value CVEs recently too, it comes about because of exactly what you're talking about, right? Like that intersection between, hey, my custom code and the way that I'm calling these libraries, and even if the maintainer didn't mean for it to be used in that way, developers have a tendency to find those shortcuts or whatever it is, and then use them, and then that's what gets attacked. So yeah, like in that case, it might almost be interesting to pull down, to do like some Git splunking and actually look and see, hey, where is this being used? Are there any cases where this would be like a sensitive problem? But it could also be wasted, right? Like we could find no instances of it ever being passed in that way. So it's, I don't know, like it's a difficult issue, but you're right. Like that's where I see the industry going as far as like the bug hunters, right? Is, hey, where are those messy interactions between platforms, for lack of a better term, but between libraries and applications that can be taken advantage of? So
yeah, there was this thing that was said about open source security, right? You guys might remember this, not to date you too much, but do you remember somebody said something about open source security about eyeballs? Like there was some eyeballs and shallowness. And I remember there was a quote out there that was like, you've given enough eyeballs, all bugs are shallow. Uh-huh. This was a reason for using like Apache or Nginx over a proprietary web server back in the day. This is the reason why if you have like an open source library, potentially more people are looking at it, therefore it'll have better security than like a proprietary closed source library. And I think a lot of people kind of adopted this mindset. And I think I'm here to share that the reality is that there's a long tail of consumption when it comes to open source libraries, and that it's not all grouped in just a few libraries. And that that long tail of consumption means that lots of libraries get used a little bit, and many of those are never looked at. I do in-person security code training, just like, I ask developers, I say, how many of you are looking at the code of your third-party dependencies? I get 0 hands every time, doesn't matter how many people are in the room. No one's looking. So if you just look a little, this is another good news for those that, those folks that are like, hey, I'm an offensive security person, and I'm a pen tester and I'm looking to be relevant in the AppSec era or the product sec era, one thing you could do is you could get like a whole page of CVEs on your resume by just going and looking at the open source ecosystem security and reporting some vulnerabilities to us over at the work group.
Yeah, actually, so we were having this conversation at work yesterday, which was about the fact that so I used Application Inspector on a few of our applications just in different languages just to see how it sort of like stacked up. And what was cool was and by the way, Seth, I think we had brought up the Application Inspector either a couple episodes ago or something like that. But anyways, it pointed out things like, where authentication's occurring, but also like where networking is occurring. And then a kind of a light bulb moment where it was like, well, if we can run this on our libraries and it didn't have networking before, meaning like it didn't have calls that the library was making out before, and all of a sudden now it does, we can do a diff and an alert that says like, hey, this library's never made calls out to the web before, and now it does. You might want to take a look at that. And just for like, looking at like backdoored libraries, not necessarily insecure libraries, but more so just like little things that, might be stuffed in there to make that a malicious library.
Yeah, I got really lucky when around the time I joined NPM, Adam and John, who were both already at NPM and had built the Node security project together, and they had been doing some of this behavioral analysis of modules that have been uploaded to the registry. So when you upload a package to the registry, a lot of people don't realize that that's not necessarily the same code that's on GitHub, right? So GitHub is a different company, we both know, and different set of code. And then NPM has some kind of tarball of stuff, and that's what you actually get and run on your computer. So a lot of the security program at NPM was looking into analyzing what's in these tarballs and what is their behavior. So John and Adam did a bunch of work to start doing that analysis at scale within an NPM and saving those results. And then I worked on a GraphQL API where we're starting to surface some of those results. It's called NPM Insights, and it's in beta right now. And you can sign up and get access to it. But the idea is just, historically, did this module ever do some of the things you're talking about? Touch the file system, make network requests. And what are the deltas between the old behavior and the new behavior? Along with things like, has a maintainer changed? Does it use two-factor auth during publish? And other metadata you might care about. That's the idea behind that project.
It's a super, I think Adam was kind of teasing at it and hinting at it, but it's interesting to hear that those are the sort of metrics being used to, and it kind of reminds me of like we had Kelly Robinson on last week. She was talking about Stir and Shake, and they're basically kind of doing a similar thing where it's reputation based, but there's levels of your reputation. And it sort of feels like a similar approach. There's levels of reputation and like potential risk based off those various metrics you just mentioned. So that's really
cool. Adam's really bright when it comes to this. So when I joined, I was like, all right, we'll figure it out, right? We'll figure out the trusted and untrusted modules. And Adam's like, we stand no chance. What we need to do is provide the data to everyone, and then hopefully the crowd will make sense of it. So if we're publishing these insights, like, hey, these are the network requests for this particular version of this particular package, hopefully somebody else builds something on top of that that does the correlation and says that's bad or that's good or those types of things.
Yeah, I think there's a space there, like indicators as opposed to like.
He called them indicators of compromise. That's pretty.
It's almost like indicators instead of compromise of indicate. Well, they are indicators of compromise for sure if you are seeing activity, but within a code base itself, I want to say there's indicators of exploitation or possibility, right? That we can almost take advantage of when we're digging through something like a tarball or something else, as far as, hey, it looks like this library is represented as, an authentication library. And all of a sudden we're seeing, data or like functionality that's not associated with that. It's a deeper level analysis, and it goes to static analysis.
It's interesting. Like I was really, before I joined Adam's team, I was really focused on the source code itself. Like when you author the source code, does it contain flaws? And that's the work I'm doing with the work group, is we're looking at the source code level vulnerabilities. But Adam has been very focused on the runtime behavioral analysis, which is a lot of what we're talking about now. It's like, when you run it, what does it do? And that's a whole different question, right? And a whole different challenge. I think a lot of people in the malware space know about that, and they have corpuses and other tools for detecting. So I think the biggest threat right now in the NPM ecosystem is that malware gets introduced and then downloaded, not so much that somebody makes a mistake and accidentally has cross-site scripting in their plugin or whatever.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, we're talking about that all the time, right? Like it's the, somebody takes over a dependency or whatever else, right? And then introduces a malicious, malicious code in there to do something because they know that, hey, this project has, 20,000 stars and 5 million downloads a week, right? Like, hey, that's a better target for me. And that's a better time investment as an attacker than it is to find XSS in a library somewhere that already exists. Let's just take it over and push our code out, and everybody pulls it down, right? So, but yeah, okay. So, I don't know if we've talked that out. Anything else on it? Like I did want to dig a little bit.
I'm interested in Ken's point of view because really he's got the author type stuff and we've got the runtime stuff.
Yeah. Ken?
Yeah, I'm not sure. Let me think about that. How about that? Also, sorry, I was having some technical issues connecting. Like my Bluetooth has gone wild. If you saw me shuffling around, that's why. Okay. So I've lost some of the conversation a bit. So
I thought you were taking notes on what I had said that was inaccurate.
No, I had to lift up. No, I was like trying to reshuffle my stuff and like lift up my laptop. I was actually lost connection on trackpad and my AirPods. So apologies there.
No worries.
I mean, I'm looking forward to. Yeah, go ahead.
No, you're looking forward to.
Yeah, I mean, kind of a bright future for security of code. Based on my experiences, working with NPM and some of the teams that I've been able to meet through Loco Moco Sec, I think that what's going to happen is something similar to what's happened in other spaces, right? I talk to developers about this often, which is, who do you send your code to for performance review? And they go, what do you mean? I'm like, you write all those nested for loops and stuff, and then you give it to the performance team, and then they find them and fix those for you. They go, no, we just don't do, crazy stuff. And then, okay, what about QA? Do you still give it to QA? And they go, no, we do automated QA. We got automatic code coverage. We catch regressions. And like ops, do you get your ops people? Is that who really handles like operations? No, we're trying to automate as much of that as we can. We got tools. We got Kubernetes, as much as you feel positive or negative about Kubernetes, and it's like, if we could, I'm showing these developers like what OWASP has created, the guidance we have around secure coding, the stuff that Jim Manico talks about and others. And the developers are kind of looking at me like, this is the basics. I mean, they're like, yeah, if we really cared, we're the developers, if we really cared about the secure coding, yeah, we could make this way better. We could build you guys way better tools. If we could just get a little bit of traction with them. And once they decide, like the development community decides like, okay, we'll do secure coding too, in addition to all these other things, it'll just be like a completely different world from a productivity perspective as far as getting that code to be more high quality. So I think we're almost there. I think some of us are trying to make that happen, but it's probably not going to be the same community that's currently doing all the security work at all. I think it's just going to be the development community doing, better.
Doing secure code. Yeah, doing it better.
Yeah.
Again, I'm pretty cynical when it comes to this. I mean, it all stems from dealing with really, really large old companies, and that like they're still dealing with COBOL that's 30 years old, right? Like that, there's no maintainer that's there anymore. And it's great that they start to talk about moving to Node or something else. But, hell, at times, if I could get them to like Java struts as opposed to, COBOL, I'd probably be happy, just to something that's object oriented. But that's not always the case. So like, I agree, because on the one side, I go to the conferences, I see what's going on and I see the possibilities. And, I've talked about like, building, like the whole sputter thing that, I did a couple of years ago, that like where it's, hey, if we build these unit tests right, we don't have to worry about, exploitation because we've already quashed it all, right? We've already identified the risks. The developers know better. We know that. As a security, as an AppSec person, I know that the developers know better how that code is supposed to be used and what the risks are that are associated with it. But what do you do in a situation where you're dealing with COBOL code, right? That the main developers, they've passed away 10, 15 years ago, and the company is struggling. And if we pull that out, the company loses $1 billion a year. Right? Like that.
Well, another question is, are software companies going to be replacing existing traditional businesses? And those companies that don't become software companies and transform might not be able to compete with companies who are software.
That's true.
So I guess that plays itself out if that holds true.
Yeah, and that's like we're seeing that with like even with Tesla, right? Like that's probably like one of those like disrupting companies that's popped up. It is a software company, right? Yes, they build cars. Yes, they do other things, but they build the software that runs all this stuff, and it's displacing. Like they're valued now more than what GM or whatever it is because of the disruption that they're pushing in that industry. So I wonder if like a bank or something else, you're going to have that same sort of that same level of disruption. Like,
well,
I can see that
Capital One, for example, is a software company.
Yeah, for sure, no question.
Yeah, but that I still go back to, I know that those guys are using a mainframe, right? Like I know, like every bank that's out there uses that for batch processing, and as much as they are a software company and they're trying to get away from that, that on the back end there are processes that like would make you shake your head both as a developer and a security person because of the industry in and of itself and how it's built. So
yeah, I do these trainings too. I go out, I meet companies, and maybe they do something with physical goods, and maybe they do manufacturing, and I meet the developer, and he's been there since college, and he's 60, and I'm trying to talk to him about secure coding, and he's talking about mainframes. So no, I've lived this reality as well, but again,
I'm the student that has their arms crossed. That's like, there's always one. We've talked about this before. There's always one who's just like so cynical and so like whatever. They don't want to be there, and you don't want them to be there. To be frankly, fairly honest about it. Like they just, nobody's happy about the situation, and they're the person working on that thing that that none of the training's applicable to, and you're like, well, what do you do? But I mean, to be fair, like here's a take on this though. What if that's fine? What if those mainframes are just like surrounded by technology that is like the main cushion of, and that's the bit that's changing, and that's the cushion in front of that technology, so that if something goes wrong, it's like got levels, right? Where the mainframes are essentially, they're working fine, and there's a lot of stuff that makes sure that that everything works seamlessly, but it's not those specific mainframes. Does that make any sense? Like there's layers of technology in front of it, and then like, is that a problem at that point? I mean, I think like you should definitely upgrade often, especially if your business relies on software in the sense of speed of delivery and changing to like different business goals. But like at the same time, you can do a lot of that with putting that cushion in front of those, which is what they essentially do, right? Those mainframes. So it's like,
I don't know. It's not the same as it was, right? I remember like the first web front end that I dealt with when I was working at the bank, right? It was passing, I mean, basically there was a small proxy, but it was passing stuff directly back to the mainframe, right? Like it was almost, it was almost treating it as like a backend database or a backend web service that just talked TN3270 as opposed to speaking, XML or whatever else, right? And I know that a lot of that's been abstracted out because of IBM and everything that they do, as well as like everything that we're talking about here. But Ken, I would agree. We almost start to treat that as a library, like Ron or whatever, right? We're treating it as, hey, guess what? This is something we interact with, but realistically, it's just software on the back end that we interact with. And as long as we protect everything up front and we know how to interact with it, what do we care, right?
Yeah, when I was in the military, a good example of this is we were like on the cutting edge with Windows Exchange servers and domain controllers, like Windows 2000, we're just moving up in the world from NT. And anyway, so so there's all this technology, this messaging technology, but at the end of the day, when you follow the line back far enough, I'm not kidding, there are these giant machines on board the ship that there's giant machines in these giant racks. They have virtually no processing power, virtually no memory. They have some blinking lights, and they run the most basic version of Unix that you've ever seen. And that was the underlying like underpinning technology to it all. And it actually worked really flawlessly because it was so simple and dumb and didn't, there were other things around that, but those things were never the issue. All the other stuff, like our routing and switching equipment, from the Cisco to the Alcatel to like the Windows stuff, all that stuff constantly failed, constantly had issues, but not these old big buckets of junk, that run like the most simple Nix version you've ever seen. So
I got a question for you, Ken, because I feel like you're years ahead of me in this category I'm talking about. I was looking through some content on the internet and I ran across like these videos where it's just like you and an editor and a monologue of you showing every secure coding technique, like using Node and Express, and I think there was like other languages and platforms. They all like all the video preview, screens look the same. Like it looked like you just went crazy at some point. We're like, I'm just going to tell everyone how to code securely in every platform I know and make a video out of it.
I think that was the SecCast thing at one point. Yeah. Or just that's fun. That's funny. That was a lot of fun though. It was not easy to produce, but yeah, that was super fun.
How much time that must have taken, like to just sit and do each of those videos. Must have been hundreds of hours.
Probably. Yeah. And you have to research all the different, cause like you work with Express. So in those early days of Express, it was weird trying to get security stuff in there. But what was nice is actually like Adam from NPM, Adam Baldwin, had put out, and with the Lyft team had put out like things. I don't know I think it was, forget what it was called. Maybe Helmet was back. Yeah, I think Helmet was maybe back then available, but yeah, it was nice to have those different. But you got to test out those libraries and configure them and stuff like that. So that was a lot of fun.
What did you do with all those videos? Did they get viewed and did it make the change you were hoping for?
I don't remember actually. Seth,
I'm just looking. They're still all up there, right?
Oh,
yeah. If you can find them on that old channel, right?
They're unique in the way that they are very like the only other person I saw doing that was like Jim Manico was doing it in person, talking about really specific defensive techniques as it related to different coding frameworks. But around that time when those videos were coming out, I was seeing a lot of attack-based. Still, I see a lot of attack-based videos. Those were like uniquely defensive.
Oh, why is because I had spent a lot of time doing attack-related stuff, right? Like I think in the early days of when I had my own blog that was technical, I was doing a lot of burp stuff and a lot of like how to make things work and how to like just modify burp and use different attack tools and all this stuff. And like, but that was just the natural evolution, which is like kind of to your point back in the original part of this podcast where the two of you were talking about sort of the progression of careers for people where it's like they start out maybe doing a little consulting, pen testing, and then eventually that splits off as an industry or as a career to like building tools for people or building product security, I believe is the term you used, which is like, maybe building two-factor auth on an app or whatever. But anyways, like as that progression happened, for me, I realized like with all the clients that we had, and I think Seth as well, like you get to a point where you're like, let's just show people how to do this correctly, because breaking stuff is no longer really, it's not that it's not fun. It's fun to do that, but it's not as rewarding, I feel like, as
after the 99th SQL injection or whatever, you're like, okay, yep, let's move on. Oh, look, you're using Rails, right? And I think a portion of that too, Ken, was like we were starting to kind of build a training platform, and it was kind of the first go-to, right? But the amount of time that it takes to actually script something like that up, to your point, Ron, is pretty, like, it's intensive, right? To figure out, hey, these are the small nuances that you need to know about this specific version of Express or this specific version of Django on how to eliminate, or implement CSRF, right? It's not a trivial amount of time, right? And I remember Ken spending, at least a couple days a week on some of those videos to actually get them out and then produced, right? So yeah, I'm pretty sure they're still out there, right? So.
Yeah, and actually Ken Toller, who watches the podcast, shout out to him. he actually made the jingle for the intro to those videos.
That's right.
So that was Ken Toller who actually did that. Yeah, I forgot all about these videos. It's funny, man. There's a lot of them.
Oh, geez, yeah.
Yeah. And
So I think with the developers, when I ask now, when I do these secure code trainings, I ask, let's list 10 vulnerability types that you guys can think of. And they usually list out like 4 or 5 vulnerability types, and then maybe some other information that sounds security related. And then I say, well, what's the defense for DOM based XSS? Crickets. What's SQL injection? Parameterization, right? That's there. I go, okay. Did you look in your library and make sure that it really does parameterization and doesn't do concatenation under the hood? What? Well, most libraries do, even the most popular ones for performance reasons. Like, what? Like, yeah, never mind. And you kind of go through like, the different categories, and the developers, once you tell them like, well, yeah, you want, contextual encoding, or you whatever the defense you want them to do is, then they just, they write it down and they'll do it in the future. I think by getting that information to them in a relevant way, where they understand like enough about what the problem is, but more like, what's the secure coding technique I need to use? Or how do I call the library in a way that's safe? But just getting out there and telling that to people,
what amazes me is you're absolutely right. Is like, so we've got some layers, with ORMs, but ultimately I have seen a lot of database administrators specifically requesting that you don't build in the protections that we talk about with like SQL injection, because it is not performant, because it's not, and you're like, but they, I'm trying to it's hard without code to give a concrete example, but it's like, don't use like and there is a difference between parameterized and
prepared.
Thank you. Yeah. So I'll say, well, don't use a prepared statement. It's not as performant, and that kind of immediately gets you like, I don't know if that's the right way. And then you have to go back and be like, well, the security community screwed up the concept between prepared and parameterized statements, and then it leads you down a rabbit hole of like, yeah, actually that's not the most performant, and there are still safe ways to do this. But it challenges the notions that like, yeah, OWASP.
Oh yeah, there's some PRs out there in the JavaScript community on popular ORMs that have been around. I saw one that was like 4 years of someone trying to get the under the hood changes made so that it didn't do concatenation, because the API appeared to do something safer. And for years it's going back and forth. No, it's get rejected, doesn't have the coverage, doesn't has these problems. It's like, yeah. Meanwhile, everybody's just shipping, right, using the thing because that's what you do.
That's what you do.
Yeah, but getting the technique into the hands of the developer and just getting that engagement where they start to care, because these people build amazing things. I mean, think about how different it is to build a software application now using modern tooling than it was like even 10 years ago when I was CTO of a company. I mean, it's worlds different and worlds easier to build things. So if we could get these same, the kind of the meta language people, right? The people who build the things around a language that make a community. Tools like NPM, other tools, if they could do something and they cared, they could build something way better than the security community is capable of building, I think.
Yeah, and it's funny because you had mentioned going into developers and asking them if they looked at the code of the libraries that they've implemented, and Zero Hands coming up. And like, if you look to your point about the ease of use, if you look at most of the libraries that you're including, you do what? You look at the README. Most of the README has like kind of the description of what you need. Maybe you'll go to the wiki because maybe there's some more detailed information that you need on usage of the library, but that's about it. I mean, and then in a very short period of time, you're up and running with like an app that does what you need to do. Oh, you need to do OAuth, you need to do SAML, you need to do authentication, you need to do, call out and upload some files to AWS, or you need to spin up some infrastructure. Like, cool, we can do all of that in minutes with just like reading some READMEs. You don't necessarily know anything about the code that's underpinning the tasks that you're taking on, and you have no reason to really delve in deeply into the libraries, but you can get up to speed pretty quick on did we lose Seth?
Maybe.
I don't know what
I think
happened.
Your colleague Neil said one of the many smart things he's told me was, API examples should be safe to copy paste. Like, copy pasting shouldn't be considered bad, right? And it's secure. But this is very challenging in cases like Redux, where for a year and a half the default example contained injection vulnerabilities, and if you go search on GitHub, I mean, there's like 10,000 plus copies of that code out there now, and that's not a library you could patch, right? So it's hard to tell developers like it's not safe to copy paste. You got to go and look at the library code. But there are solutions to this, like limiting your consumption of third-party libraries. and coming up with some kind of allow list that has been in some way reviewed. Some companies are doing that. They don't just pull in all different types of dependencies. They pull in a specifically allowed list of dependencies and transitive dependencies that they know are safe.
And then they set up assuming their own library server, like whether it be an NPM server or
there's tools like there's a couple commercial tools like Artifactory, Nexus, and then there's open source stuff. In the NPM world, we have Verdaccio, but people set stuff up that sits inline and doesn't allow you to pull in the junk into your repos.
So I did want to get to one question for you with React. Like overall, I'm not very familiar with the various React. Like I'm at the very highest levels, mostly because of those talks at Loco Moco and whatnot, like dangerously set inner HTML, those sort of obvious things. But like, it sounds like there's quite a bit to writing secure React code.
Yeah. So here's what happened. Yeah, Jim taps me and he goes, "Hey, Ron, do you want to write some courses for Synopsys?" And I said, "That sounds like fun." And he goes, "Okay, first one, you get to write one on React." Like, that sounds like a non-starter. I mean, isn't it? I mean, you're talking about a client-side library that has like a single mechanism for updating the DOM, and you write code that, in JSX that just calls React create element a bunch of times and creates a tree, which then gets written to the DOM using one mechanism. So I'm like, do you want me to audit that mechanism? Like, is that what we're talking about here? And I started to really look into it. Luckily, I had the space to do that. Synopsys gave me some time to do some research before I did the writing, which I thought was brilliant. And I ended up looking into it. Yeah, I looked into it, and it turns out, okay, you're manipulating the DOM, right, in React, client-side React. And there's a mechanism for doing the update, which is the create element call. Yeah, you can use dangerously set inner HTML if you'd like to set the content of that element to an HTML fragment. And that's clearly dangerous. Dangerously set inner HTML is an API that's labeled dangerous. But developers want more than one way to get into the DOM. They want other escape hatches. And so as I looked at the React ecosystem, I noticed that developers had discovered other ways in the React library, such as refs, which return the underlying DOM node that's just been rendered back to the component. So you rendered it, use the render path that has a protection that does automatic contextual encoding. But now you get a ref back, and that ref is a straight API to the DOM. So you can enter HTML, you can set the text content of a script element. You're back to all those same issues that you had when you wrote, regular old code to talk to the DOM and make it updates. So the usage of refs, I went, how prevalent is it? Well, 61% of the top 100 libraries use refs. 12% of the top 100 libraries use dangerously set inner HTML. There's also other things like find DOM node, which is just a method that you call in React that gives you direct access to a DOM, kind of like query selectors.
Sure.
There's just these other ways to break out of the update cycle in React and jump right back into editing the DOM. So I think the defense is you use linters and you configure them to look for these dangerous things at development time and integration time, and then also you also use linters for all the typical DOM syncs, right? All the places where you get to introduce a script, and possibly turn on content security policy and trusted types. Also good ideas, but in React, I would say the most defended app would be just like any thing you're trying to defend for DOM-based cross-site scripting. If you could do content security policy default source, none, that would be great. Then you won't have any scripts. But I think in React, there's that very well labeled escape hatch, dangerously set inner HTML. But then there's more subtly labeled escape hatches like refs and find DOM node that there's not as much awareness around it, and it's not as obvious.
Like direct access to these elements, and then you can shoot yourself in the foot. That's interesting. Because I wasn't sure. Again, I'm such a novice to React and haven't spent nearly enough time doing it. That's interesting that they've given these. That's a very like innocuous name. I mean, it makes sense, right? Like the naming makes sense, but
another thing that's happening is, a lot of people have linters turned on, so they won't let them use, let's say, these dangerous things.
Oh.
And so the developer's trying to use something dangerous, and there's a linter. It's like, you can't. But then what happens is they go off on the ecosystem, and they go on npmjs.com, and they find a library that does what they want to do, right? Like put an SVG on the page.
Really?
Yeah.
And then it's in that library code where the mistake is. And typically your linter doesn't run on your node modules folder, right? It just runs your code. So you wrote code that's safe, potentially, But then you brought in a component via third-party libraries, and under the hood, they're just dangerously setting inner HTML for you. Like there was literally one called React Safe, and all it did was it was called React Safe, and it just took the text content that you put in there and put it directly into dangerously set inner HTML for you.
Wait, and it was called React Safe?
Yeah, I got to point out, he might have taken it down because I've been telling people this for like a year.
That's amazing.
Avoids the annoyance of having to set dangerously inner HTML yourself, and instead safely lets you set it.
That is hilarious, and I feel like that's so hilarious.
So
I'm so used to seeing that with functions are built into frameworks where it's called safe, but not like a separate library that decided to. Sorry, I'm like talking and also desperately trying to find this. This is awesome. That's so funny.
I'll find it. So another thing that's interesting with React, right, is you're writing this React app because you want to render it in the browser. And so over time, your React app keeps getting bigger. So it starts out as a meg, then it's 10 megs, next thing you know. So now you're talking about like dynamic imports or code splitting or doing something with your bundle to try to reduce the amount that you serve to the other person. You're using Webpack. But at some point, developers are like, this is crazy. For SEO reasons and for performance reasons, we need to start server-side rendering these React components. So now we're going to server-side render those React components. Well, now we're executing them in the Node environment, right?
Yep.
You've got a whole new attack surface. And then now you've got server-side frameworks like Next.js where they're saying, hey, we got some hooks that will run server-side exclusively to allow you to get ready to initially render to then serve client-side and finish rendering. And people are doing things on GitHub, I noticed, like on the server side, when their React component renders server-side, they're making direct SQL calls to the database to pull in data of the component, initially render it, serve it client-side, and have it render again. So now you're doing an audit of a React app and you're looking for SQL injection vulnerabilities, which is not super. So this attack surface just kind of keeps exploding when it comes to React.
I'm even thinking like React Native applications, right? The stuff that goes on in a mobile app, like again, it's a different surface, like that. You've got like all the data protection issues and everything else that goes on inside of the mobile app that you're not as concerned about when you're running inside of a browser, right? And so, I know that there's more there. I know that there's more there that you're going to want to deal with and you're going to be concerned about. And has that come up as well? Like I know that the React Native stuff has been, like it's been a hot issue, right, for us on the consulting side. Like, have you dealt with that as much?
I haven't dealt with any client-side vulnerabilities when it comes to React Native apps. The ones that I've looked at are the typical mobile application vulnerabilities, like you embedded your secrets in the client or you sent insecure communication channel between the client and server, more of that kind of thing. But I don't know of any, like direct injection attacks that are prevalent in React Native. But I don't write a lot of React Native code. I mostly write web-based React that uses React DOM. Okay, cool. All right. Well, good.
I did post a link to that.
To that library, yeah.
But I like Lewis. Lewis's comment. I wanted to add it to the video because that's basically what the thread I posted was. It's just like, well, we'll add a warning. So, that's pretty funny. Anyways, interesting. That's very. I wonder if that's. You have to wonder if it's purposeful. Like I really just want to bypass, like this security check that this lender's throwing a warning on, or is it just a lack of information, where it's just like, well, I don't know, can't do it this way. I can do it this way. So boom, like I've got a timeline to ship and guess what? In the next 4 hours, I can get that done. So, you got to wonder. I don't feel like I genuinely try. Maybe I'm trying to be optimistic, but I think it feels like it would probably be more likely. It's just I want to get something working. I just know that that's usually the burden, right? Is just like getting things going. So I think that like if you see a warning in your linter and it's like, what, dangerously what? I don't know what this is. I just want to do the thing. Oh, what is this? It fixes it. Cool. I'm moving on. I don't have time for this. I gotta get this spin up.
Yeah. And I'd be in agreement there because I feel like most of the vulnerabilities, and Ron, I think you were talking about this, right? Is when you're saying that, hey, when you tell the developers and you teach them, They just go out and do it, and they usually do it in a better manner than we do coming in as security people, right? But it's the same issue that we're having, is that they've got timelines, they've got, releases that they've got to put out, they've got features that they're trying to build, and we haven't given them the tools to do that securely. And I know this was Jim's big, like when we had him on, he's like, oh, there's going to be this great framework that's going to take care of all the security issues for us, right? And eventually developers are going to use that. But again, I was cynical, but that's fine, right? Like, we'll get over that. When we give them the right tools and we educate them, they seem to naturally take that on, and it's less of a concern for us. At that point, we're looking for more edge cases than we are the fact that, hey, SQL injection's everywhere, right?
Yeah, giving developers a secure API and then limiting their ability to get outside. So one of the things the React team is doing is they're actually looking into putting trusted types into version 17. And I don't know if you guys have been tracking trusted types development, but I'm a big fan. It's if they can manage to do that, I mean, it's sort of a moot point that there's all these script injection escape hatches, because none of them will function. Yeah. So React itself will do the right thing and use trusted types. And then if you try to do something weird with refs or some other bypass, you're just going to end up, throwing exceptions.
So, yeah, but okay, that's great. But then you think about, okay, this developer that's written this app and it's running in production, and all of a sudden the React release just kills the app. What are they going to do? Well, they're going to roll back, right? Or they're going to fork, right? So yes, there's a future there. They'll get to it eventually. But the initial, it's so painful, right?
You're making me feel so naive today, Seth. I'm
not trying to, right?
You're salty today, Seth. No, the thing is, Seth deals with. I think
reality.
Seth has been dealing with reality, too long. No, but he's dealing with these. I mean, from a consulting perspective, it was more often yes, it was more fun to deal with sort of the modern companies, but it was more frequent to deal with what, Seth's talking about, or it's just an amalgamation of crap that just,
seems to
processes and technologies and cultures that just all combine to make it very difficult to pay.
So what I'm saying, is I agree, and I'm looking forward to it, but on the ground, we're just.
I'm here for the future with good news, Seth.
I'm coming eventually, or I'm just going to join Stefan and become a nihilist and just go, whoop, we're done, right? I don't know. It's hard not to be cynical at times. That's what I'm getting at, right?
We have some reality too. NPM doesn't have infinite resources, but we have a lot of users. Sure. And, we have occasionally something will come up in our code that needs help. And we've got some of the most talented JavaScript developers on earth working at NPM, and they typically come up with a really quick fix to something if there is a need. But the security team jumps in as well and ships PRs and attempts to, where we can help. We're not as good at developers as the actual developers who are building some of this stuff. But if we can give them a PR and a unit test, and we don't lower code coverage, and they can merge it, that's the easiest way to communicate with our development teams. So some of this, security can level up if they want to participate.
I agree. Because there's actually, most of the time now I think about it, the security vulnerability comes down to one line of code. So you can make simple changes and throw up some unit tests and be like, here's the, and they can always just review and say look, make a change here to be this. And they're like, cool. And then you just ship it and deploy it. Security should, you're right. I mean, I think that's the evolution of a good AppSec person. And that's why we talk about having those fundamental skills of understanding things like networking and the OSI layer, but also programming. Understand how to program. You don't have to be the best programmer in the world, but you need to be able to read and write software for this very specific reason. Obviously be on source code reviews and stuff like that, but you should be able to contribute, level up, help out.
Well, there was recently, actually, this came up, right? I think I tweeted out about it, but it was it's really easy as a security person to walk in and say, hey, there's this issue, go fix it, right? And we always deal with this, on the consulting side as well, right? Hey, we found this exploit. This is how you should fix it. As a security person, you want to really know what it's like. Actually go out and try to fix one of those in a code base that's 20 years old, right? And you're like, oh crap! Yeah, exactly. It's not an easy thing. to ask, a developer to go and spend what could be like 4 or 5 days, as much time as it took you to find like 20 issues in the code base, they may only be able to fix one or maybe half of one of those issues. And along with all the other pressures that go into it, it's just not an easy task, but it'll make you better as a security person to realize what's going on underneath the hood.
And like Dr. Justin Collins, I don't know if he likes being called Dr. Justin Collins.
Just call him Dr. Justin Collins.
Just Dr. Collins.
Dr. Beef. Dr. President Beef.
Dr. President Beef.
Yeah, he talks about the humble side of this, which is, even with a really great AppSec team, you're not going to be able to jump into other people's code bases and services and ship the fix in every case. Right? And you're going to need these developers to just understand the defenses and then apply them, because you can't do it. I mean, occasionally I can help out at NPM, but there's definitely cases where I'm like way, way, way beyond my depth with some of this tooling that they've built.
Yeah. Yeah. Cool.
Now that you're saying that, sorry, I know we're about to jump off because we've gone over for a while, which I really love because it's been great conversation. I was just thinking of like training that would be, because we've talked about training before, training that'd be super realistic would be kind of cool if you could just like do a couple days or a few days of like simulating an actual day-to-day work, and then like interrupting it with different security issues. And then like, I don't know, I'm just kind of thinking that would be kind of like, honestly, make it training that's so realistic and so situational and feels like almost like you're part of theater in a way, like but you're actually having to solve issues and sort of see how these things crop up. That would be really fun. It'd be really, really an interesting type of training. I haven't seen anything like that before personally.
You're trying to fix cross-site scripting and get the unit test to pass.
Yeah.
It's like, hey, quick question. Does this content security policy look good?
Yeah, exactly. Stuff like, no.
Yeah.
Situationally, like that's exactly what comes up. So
there's the Joes versus pros that is out there that's very similar to that, right? Like that's, hey, here we're trying to teach these people about security issues. But it's more network related, right? They'll turn over something to you that has like outdated Apache and Nginx running on it with specific vulnerabilities, and hey, you've got to keep this stuff up and running while somebody else attacks it. And so there's this whole kind of aspect of, hey, this is real life, and at the same time you have to answer calls and support somebody on, hey, the VoIP isn't working or something like that. So fix real issues that introduces some of that, but it's not from a developer perspective, right? And I think you're right. It would be really interesting to actually see that happen, or to build something like that where, hey, you've got this feature that needs to be released, and you got a day and a half to put it out. But at the same time, here's a security issue that we found that's super critical. What are you going to do, right? Because if you don't release both, you don't like pass or whatever else. But if you get exploited, it'd be fun to actually see. I don't know if I could handle the stress of that, right? But
I'm attempting to do something in this arena, at least. I've done a lot of workshop-based training as well. Just plain software development training. I did that for a while. So one of the things that I'm going to do in Santa Barbara actually this next weekend is I'm doing an OWASP kind of one-day free event on the weekend. And what I'm going to have is code that has a vulnerability in it. And when you clone it, the linter will be telling you that there's an issue. And then what I'll be talking about, like, what the vulnerability type is and what the common defensive pattern is. And the hope will be that then the audience can clone the repo, run the tooling to see the error, fix it, and then have the test pass. And sounds like maybe a little bit too optimistic to pull off, but we'll see how many people want to do it. We got like 15 people signed up, and then I'm going to be giving a version of that at Loco Moco Sec, how to find vulnerabilities in third-party components and how to remediate them and how to audit, relatively large React and Node applications and do the remediation.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Well, like if I can get my tickets all sorted and get my travels sorted, I'll see you there then.
Now, wait, what is this?
So if you've never heard of it, Seth, no, I won't go into it.
Right. Cool. Well, Ron, thank you for joining. I feel like we could go on for another hour, if not more. So
I know I'm like, I have a meeting in like 8 minutes, and I'm like, I just want to keep going. Yeah.
But we appreciate it. Let's have you back on sometime, because I like this conversation has been really good. it helps me to realize that there's a future out there that doesn't involve COBOL, but whatever, right? Like, well,
in Hawaii, come see.
In Hawaii, yes.
Yeah.
So, it's been super informative. Let's keep in touch, and I'll get this posted, shortly, right? Like later this afternoon for the other channels. So,
see you guys.
Yep.
All right. Thank you everyone for watching. Thank you,
Thanks.
Ron, for your time. All right. Bye.